You are listening to the Stand Out Now podcast with your host, Dave Mendonca. Check out each episode as top experts share their proven marketing, publicity, and sales tips to help you cut through the advertising noise so you can reach your ideal clients, get noticed, and connect with powerful influencers. The Stand Out Now podcast is brought to you by podcastinterviewexperts.com, helping entrepreneurs attract clients through business podcast guest appearances.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you for listening. My guest today is a Wall Street Journal bestselling author, digital marketing pioneer, and speaker who inspires and empowers you to create marketing that your customers will love, which will ignite real results for your business. Ann Handley, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave. It's awesome to be here.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you here. Now, Ann, let's start off with a little fun. This is a question I ask all my guests. Here we go. When you were a kid, what marketing or sales or publicity or other persuasive strategies, knowingly or unknowingly, did you use to get what you wanted?
So when I was a kid, I had a diary, like a lot of kids do. You get them for, especially if you're sort of a writerly kind of kid, relatives tend to give them notebooks or diaries to you for your birthday or Christmas or whatever. And so I had a ton of those because I was that writerly kind of kid, but I always found it very unsatisfying to write in a diary because I already knew what I thought about things. Why did I have to write to myself? So what was more satisfying for me is that I decided, you know what, I'm going to take all this pent-up writing energy and publish a neighborhood newsletter.
Wow.
So I would go around the neighborhood and interview my neighbors about what was going on, or sometimes just observe, the people across the street got a new mailbox, some real breaking news, Dave, really some life-changing stuff. And I published a newsletter on a sort of regular basis one summer and delivered it around the neighborhood on my bike. My dad would take it to work and photograph it like a mimeograph machine at the time, bring it home to me and give it to me, and I would distribute it. So it was a very early lesson in a couple of things. Number one, that to me, the best part of publishing, and in our content marketing world now, in our marketing world, everybody is a publisher. If you have a website, you're a publisher. So the most interesting part to me about publishing was always about the audience. Who am I writing to? How do I make it about them? So that's a first sort of marketing lesson. And then the second thing is that it's not just about the content, it's also about the distribution. So I sort of had to take ownership of both ends of those. In terms of how it connected me to what I ultimately wanted, it sort of paid off long term because I learned that lesson when I was 8 years old, and I think about it, I kid you not, probably every single day. Not that particular story, but I think about the audience every single day. I think, why would my customers care? Why does my audience care? And I also remember that part of publishing is distribution.
Okay. So you were 8 years old when you came up with this local newsletter.
Yes. We're talking hyper-local. We're talking the people on my street and I think a few on the next street over. So yeah, it was a very targeted list.
So, okay. So where did this come from? So, okay, there's a new mailbox in the neighborhood, so Ann has to report on this. She had to create...
Yeah. Well, because as I said, I wanted to be a writer. I always wanted to be a writer from the time when I was young, and I wrote in one of those diaries that I wanted to be a writer. But the idea at the time of being a writer was, this is pre-internet, right? This is before the internet was invented. So I didn't have access to an audience. And to me, the idea of writing in a diary was really boring because I needed somebody to read what I was doing. And I was really too young to think about anything other than the fact that, I wonder what's going on in my neighborhood. Maybe they'd want to read about what I see and what I notice. So that was really the impetus for it. It wasn't very well thought out. Today, if I were a marketer looking at that strategy, I'd probably say you might want to think through that a little bit because it was, after a few issues, it was pretty onerous, to be honest with you. But I loved it. I loved the idea of just communicating with people. And so I thought, well, I'll publish like a newspaper, but I'd produced a newsletter instead because in my mind, that was sort of the more manageable.
What was the neighborhood response? The neighbors, when they opened their door and they saw this newsletter?
Well, the thing is, this is the irony of that story, is that I was also a super shy child. So I never actually went up to the door and, handed it to anybody. I would just sort of run around the neighborhood on my bike and put it in people's mailboxes surreptitiously. which I found out later is a crime, at least in the U.S. I don't know if it's true in Canada.
Right.
You're not supposed to put anything other than official U.S. mail in mailboxes here. So, luckily I avoided any jail time. But
Sure.
yeah, so that's how I distributed it. It's funny. I'm not even sure.
Okay.
I was young, so I'm sure that my parents probably heard about it. But my parents were very tolerant people in the sense that, when I think back on it now, I was kind of weird in some of the things that I did as a child, but I never felt weird,
Right,
I never made me feel like I was bizarre, even though, I've never had anybody else deliver a newsletter to me. And certainly if I were one of those neighbors, I probably would have made it a point to talk to that kid, but
right.
I don't know.
Well, right off the bat, a big tip of the cap that you actually put the newsletter in the mailbox, because I have newspaper people, they're so lazy. You just throw the newspaper at the top of the driveway. So at least you took the initiative to get into the mailbox. So I applaud you with that. And taking a look at your career here, I noticed early on a lot of journalism to start.
Yes.
So how did that happen? I know you wrote for the Boston Globe and some national business consumer magazines. What was the path leading to those opportunities?
Yeah. So, honestly, the path was pretty straight from newsletter publishing to newspapers when you think about it.
Yeah.
Obviously, I didn't maintain that newsletter for very long, but it really did embed this notion in my brain that I wanted to communicate with an audience. I have always written essays, for example. I won't say I'm a creative writer, but I sort of do creative nonfiction is sort of my thing. So I think, from there, it was really the idea of storytelling was very much embedded in my work. I guess it's always been an interest of mine. I love reading first-person essays, for example. I've always sort of been obsessed with the person behind the work. So particularly first-person essays that are produced by people who write really well or anybody who is in the arts in any way. I always just think it's really interesting to sort of see how they express themselves and how they got to where they got to. So all that to say, from school, I studied communications. I studied English. I never felt like creative writing was really a path for me. So instead, I thought, all right, I'll go into communications. Newspapers were sort of a natural fit. But what wasn't a natural fit as much was straight up news reporting. Again, because of my need for sort of the creative nonfiction, my love of narrative storytelling. And so that's kind of how it evolved from there. I initially did do a lot of news reporting for newspapers. And then one day, this guy named Dick Powers, who was my editor at the Boston Globe, he said it very kindly. He said, you're not really good at this.
Oh, wow.
He said, I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist.
Wow.
He said, you know what I think you'd be great at? I'm going to switch you to features. And so he switched me to features. And I loved features because I tapped into this idea that it's not really about what happens. It's about why it happened and what led up to it. And how did you survive that? How did you feel about it as it was happening? And so all the richer storytelling behind the story is always what I was really interested in.
Right.
So that's how it came about.
It's interesting. You're talking about being a storyteller. That is such a buzzword nowadays. Everybody's a storyteller. And what makes a good storyteller? Anybody could be a storyteller, but how can you be a storyteller?
Yeah, I have trouble with that word storyteller sometimes in a business context in particular because, like you, I think it's a little buzzwordy. I think people use it in a lot of ways to sort of mask the idea that marketing actually has to reach an objective, I guess. And so, but the way that I think about storytelling is I think about just giving your messaging more narrative, just putting real people behind the sort of, I'm going to use that word stories, I guess, but just putting real people behind the messaging that you're adopting as a company and also putting it in the context of people's lives. So in marketing, nobody cares about your business. Nobody really cares about what you do or what you sell or whatever you service. But what they care about is how that matters to them. And so to me, that's really the essence of storytelling. It's putting me, the customer, in your bigger narrative, right? It's about putting your business or your service in the context of other people's lives. I think that's really what storytelling is. There's a million ways you could iterate off of that. But ultimately, it's really putting the audience at the heart of whatever it is that you're producing in marketing.
Right. I find that so many entrepreneurs, they miss the boat in regards to thinking of the customer first, what they need, how to service them. Along the way, you launch a business, you're so immersed in it, you're thinking it's the most amazing thing, but you forget about the people you're serving. Do you find like the people that you cross, that you see, that this sort of happens a lot, or?
Yeah, and actually that's like the number one problem with marketing, I think.
Right.
And I get it. You know what? I mean, I am a marketer. I love marketers. I love marketing. And so I say it with love in my heart because I know where it comes from. We are excited about our products. We see it, how they'll help people ultimately. What we forget is that our audience, our prospects, our customers are not as excited about that until we connect the dots for them, until we tell them. And so in my mind, the best way to do that is to put actual flesh on the stories that you're telling, make them about people, talk about the people that you're helping ultimately. And so, yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. But again, I know where it comes from because we're very excited about what we have, what we're all about, especially for entrepreneurs or smaller business owners who quite often, their business has come out of a problem that they've experienced, or they're super inspired, or they're just on fire about their business, which is amazing.
Right.
But at the same time, learning to tap into that and translate it into what your audience is going to care about, like that's the sweet spot.
Oh, for sure. So is it fair to say that your journalism background pretty much laid the content groundwork for your later experiences in digital and content marketing?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, it really gave me this perspective that I don't think you get in any other industry, to think about the audience first. So my background in journalism really trained me to think about the audience first. I mean, you could say that I probably already had that proclivity based on the story that I told you about my childhood.
Sure.
But really, when I got into journalism, that's when I realized, you've really got to make it about the audience. You've got to really answer that so what question. Why are we writing about this? Why would the audience care? Like, so what? That is the basis for pretty much my entire career as a content marketer. So that's absolutely true. The other thing that really shaped my current thinking about content marketing and about, sort of the state of marketing was a book that I read, I don't know, maybe about 10 or 12 years ago. It's a book called The New Rules of Marketing and PR, written by my friend, David Meerman Scott. And I've said this before, but I don't think that I would still be in marketing had I not read that book.
Wow.
I say that because it was really the book for me that the light bulb just went on. You have those moments, Dave, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, where like you suddenly see something and you recognize it as absolute truth. And that was the moment that, like, when I read The New Rules of Marketing and PR, I was like, wow, so marketing is not about broadcasting and pushing out your messages and just crafting the perfect message about your company or slogan or tagline or jingle or whatever the case may be. Which it always kind of felt like marketing was about that up until I read that book for me. And then I read it and I was just like, wow, okay, I get it. This is really what it's all about. It's all about having your content at the heart of your marketing. I mean, he talks about many other things in that book, but for me, like that was the moment when I read that in one of the chapters. I was like, yes, this is exactly what it's all about. So that was hugely influential for me. And I've told David this personally too. Actually, I was just at an event with him in Hartford, Connecticut just yesterday. And he knows how I feel about this, but it's absolutely true.
Wow. Another part of marketing, I don't know if this appeals to you. I know with me, it's the psychology of it, just human behavior and how you can hit those points where you could find out someone's pain point and offer them a solution and whatnot. Does that appeal to you? Like, I know you're talking about the storytelling and whatnot. How about the psychology of marketing? Does that resonate?
Not so much. I got to be honest with you. It doesn't not appeal to me, but it's just not the way that I look at the world, I guess. Like to me, when you talk about the psychology of marketing or even when I read articles about it, there's always something slightly manipulative about it. Like you're trying to, and I say this with respect, it's because I don't know enough about it. But sometimes in my, like the way that I hear that, I always think, is that about sort of exploiting a weakness somewhere or finding a hole? And I'm sure that it's actually not, but that's just the way that I hear it. So, I really do approach marketing less from that aspect than from a truly like a story aspect. As you said, I also look at it from a sort of teaching aspect. How can we actually teach our customers our prospects? How do we actually bring people along with us? How do we elevate their level of knowledge? I think that's hugely important, especially in the business to business world. So those are the sort of levers that I push like in that area, which is not to say that I'm not discrediting the idea of what you're talking about at all, but that's just how I think about it.
Oh, for sure. Fair enough. Mediocre marketing. Let's talk about this, Anne. So, okay, you don't have to mention, I guess, company names and whatnot. What are some, I don't know, generic examples, like an example of like some mediocre marketing, like an ad you see in the paper or online, like it doesn't hit the mark?
Yeah. I see it all the time. Let's just go back to the mailbox that we just, we were just talking about a second ago. And when I say mailbox, I mean like the physical mailbox that we all have either, outside of our house or attached to our house or whatever. One of the things that I always think about almost every day when I go to get the mail or when one of my kids gets the mail is that, what a wasted opportunity. Because think about how much we treasure, in a way, mail these days, right? To get an actual letter from somebody, for example, I think is really a special moment. And so I think about that as like when I get these flyers and postcards and marketing messages that come into my own physical mailbox, I always think, geez, I wish somebody would actually deliver something to me that I would save instead of tossing into the recycle bin immediately.
Sure.
I always think about marketing as a sort of gift that you give your customers. I mean that quite sincerely, because I think that if you can approach your marketing as something that you want to give people because that that they will value it in whatever way that, you interpret that for your business. I think that's a better way to think about your marketing versus we just need to get our message out and touch as many people as possible. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing that I see is actually applies to our virtual mailboxes, which is our email inboxes. I launched a newsletter, my own newsletter at the beginning of this year. It's at annehandley.com/newsletter if you want to check it out. And the reason I did it is because I was thinking about this idea of how the email inbox is really, I don't know, I think of it as a pretty sacred space. I always have thought of it in that way. And I feel like, in this world where there's so much social noise, there's sort of so much going on all the time that I feel like the one certainty that we have as marketers is newsletters. And if we do them really well, if we create the kind of newsletter that our customers really want and that they would value, they won't unsubscribe. And I think that we can build a relationship with our customers through that newsletter. So those two things, it's physical mailboxes and email newsletters. And so just to finish up that story, I started my own newsletter because I thought, all right, well, I want to put my money where my mouth is.
Sure.
I really want to do something and see how hard this is to create something that's really special. And so I sort of challenged myself with that at the beginning of the year.
Right. So in regards to the email newsletter, we're all inundated with emails.
Yeah.
What are your tools to get you to cut through the noise, to get to the people that you want to get to?
First of all, is to think of your email newsletter less as a message that you have to blast out and more as a letter, which is basically what it is, right? It's a letter that you're sending to somebody. So a lot of it is mindset, approach it from that standpoint. So what does that mean? What are the hallmarks of a great letter? You know who it's from. It has an actual human voice. It doesn't sound like it's written from a company, even if it is. It's coming from somebody at a company. So really approaching it in that way is feeling like it comes from an actual person who actually wants to talk about something that they think will be important to you, which again is the hallmark of a great letter. And to have that idea that I don't want to waste anybody's time. I want to convey this in a way that's useful and interesting to them.
Sure.
I guess that's the number one thing that I take away from it is just to really think about a newsletter less as a piece of marketing and more as a letter that you're sending to somebody important. Which leads me to, I guess, my second point, which is that I only think about one subscriber at a time, which I know sounds counterintuitive.
Right.
But literally every time I write my newsletter, I think about one subscriber who I'm helping that week. I sort of keep them in my mind's eye while I'm putting this newsletter together. And, sometimes they are an actual person. Sometimes they're a composite of a few people that I might have met that week. Like I mentioned, I was at an event in Connecticut this week. But I always think about that one person because to me, that's what I need to be able to write a letter. I can't just write it to this nameless, faceless audience or persona or target market. I have to write it to one person.
Right.
And so that's what I do. I write one letter to one subscriber.
Wow. So how long did it take you to come to that conclusion that was the way to go?
Oh my gosh, a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought about this forever.
Yeah.
I'm not a very fast processor. And so I want to do things that, with intention. I don't want to just try something and then abandon it later on. So it took me a long time to come to that conclusion. I mean, I've always known that newsletters are special and important, but it wasn't until I really thought about it that it kind of, slapped me right in the face. And I was like, of course, I need to go back to my roots when I was on my bike riding around the neighborhood delivering a newsletter, right? That's what I wanted to do because I wanted to talk to people. The other reason why I decided to do a newsletter, by the way, just on my own, is because as you advance in your career, you touch things less and less. I don't make things as often anymore. I mean, I write books, I create speeches, but in terms of communicating with the audience on a consistent basis, at Marketing Profs, when I started in working with the organization in 2002, which was an eternity ago,
right.
I was doing everything. I was getting the articles from authors who wrote for Marketing Profs in my own inbox. I would edit them. I would write headlines for them. I would upload them. I would publish the newsletter. So I pushed all the buttons all along the way. Now here it is, God, how many years later? Very many years later, 16 years later, and I don't push buttons anymore. I have people who push buttons who work with me here at Marketing Profs. And so I really wanted that sense of making something and owning it and communicating directly with the audience, sort of no filters.
For sure. Can you tell the audience what is Marketing Profs?
Sure. So Marketing Profs is a marketing education and training company. We help marketers learn how to market better, essentially through using modern tools like content and email and digital marketing.
Got it. Okay. Awesome. What's the website with that company?
It's marketingprofs.com.
Awesome.
We have our own newsletter that comes out twice a week. We have lots of educational programs through webinars as well as in person. Once a year, we have our business-to-business marketing forum, which this year is in November in San Francisco. So basically, we're oriented around education, training, and we just bring the best authors and speakers directly to you.
Awesome. Okay. And if an entrepreneur wants to improve her marketing right now, what are 3 to 5 things she should do?
Oh, boy. Let's see. Think about what your audience needs from you. I talk to a lot of marketers all the time who say, well, we want to use content to reach our audience and to nurture relationships with our audience, but we don't know what to say. And so, or I talk to marketers who say, oh, we have a pretty robust marketing program already. We publish a newsletter every Tuesday, say, so we always want to write something for that. And I'm always like, okay, well, or they say but it's not doing very well, or the results are lackluster or whatever. So I think to me, it all comes back to what does your audience need from you? You want to fill in that blank, not we need a piece of content for blank. That's not the right way to approach your marketing. Instead, approach your marketing by filling in the blank of our customer needs what? What does your customer need from you? So I think any great marketing is really grounded in answering that question. Mm-hmm. How do you fit into their lives? What do they need from you? What information can you give them that will make them smarter, happier, better looking, cuter kids, whatever the case may be.
Cuter kids, okay.
All right, that may be a stretch, but you know what I'm saying. Think about elevating them,
right,
and putting your marketing in the context of their lives. So once you figure that out, honestly, the tactics don't really matter after that. I think it all comes down to the resources that an entrepreneur would have.
Right.
And also their interests. What are they really interested in? Do they like to write? Are they great on video? Are they better on a podcast like this? What resources do they have to create and to publish and to really nurture that audience of prospects? So I think those are very individual answers that an entrepreneur needs to ask his or herself. But to me, it all comes down to, it starts with really answering that question.
How do you research? Is it through social media, surveys to get that kind of info?
Yes and yes. I also think talking to people in person, one of the reasons why I love going to events is because I meet people who read Marketing Profs. I read people who have read my books. And I love hearing what is on their mind these days. What are they thinking about? What's going on with them? And how could we better serve them. And so that's always why I love going to events, because I love talking to people and I love getting that kind of information from them. So that's one thing. Second sort of research approach that I use is going back to email for a second. I get a lot of questions through email. So I collect those questions as sort of fodder for what's on the minds of my audience. What do they care about? What do they need from me? With the idea of building my own strategy around that, whether it's for my own site at Handley or whether it's for Marketing Prof. So look at your email inbox. What questions do your customers have? What questions do you get from vendors? What questions do you get from, your friend or your dad or almost anybody? I think that's a great source of information. And then, just start using that basically as almost the basis for creating content. I mean, even I think if you start there, that's already just, head and shoulders above anything else that you could possibly do.
Wow. And this has been really insightful. Some great tips. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Where can people find out more about you, your books, your speaking engagements, Marketing Profs?
So you can go to annhandley.com. If you've liked what you heard today, I'd love it if you signed up for my newsletter. I mentioned the URL already, but I'll drop it again. It's annhandley.com/newsletter. And in there, I talk about what events I'm speaking at as well, or there's usually a listing of events that I'm speaking at. So if I'm coming to your city, it would be nice to say hello. At Marketing Profs, you can go to marketingprofs.com. We also have a newsletter that comes out twice a week, and you can also find out all about our training and education programs.
Fantastic. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you so much, my friend. This is great.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Thanks again to you for listening and have a great week.
Thank you for listening to the Stand Out Now podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes and rate and review it as well. You can find out more about our program at thestandoutnowpodcast.com. Thanks again and enjoy your week.